Hi, and welcome to the Campbelltech channel. My name is Sean Campbell, and today I'm going to show you how you can convert a classic factory method to an injectable factory method in C# with .NET. Now, if you don't know what the factory pattern is or how to implement it, first watch my other video, Factory Pattern in C# Creating Objects with Ease. You'll find a link to this video in the description. Now, here we have a classic factory method that returns iPaymentService. Notice that it's got a payment method parameter, which is of type enum. When the value is credit card, we'll instantiate a new credit card payment service and return that to the client code. If it's PayPal, we'll return a new PayPal payment service, and if it's Google Pay, a new Google Pay payment service. Now, if we had another enum value, for example Apple Pay, and we do not have a case for it, then we'll throw a not supported exception, and it will say Apple Pay is not currently supported as a payment method. We could then obviously go and add a case for it and instantiate a new Apple Pay payment service class that we can conveniently add to this factory method. Now, you might say this factory method looks completely perfect. Why would we go and change that? And the reason for that is because our specific concrete classes might have different dependencies that it depends on. And with dependency injection, we inject those dependencies into the constructors. In other words, each of these payment service classes might have different constructor parameters that we need to pass to it. Now, if the factory method had to instantiate all of those different dependencies and pass them into the constructors here, that'll make this code quite nasty and add unnecessary responsibility to this factory method. The answer to this problem is dependency injection. Now, you might ask, how do we convert this classic method to make it injectable? The first thing that we need is we need access to the iService collection. So we are going to remove the payment method parameter and add a new parameter of type iService collection, and let's call it services. Then we need to go ahead and add a scoped service for each of our concrete payment service classes. We can do so by saying services.addScoped, and then we'll add one for each concrete payment service class. Firstly, for the credit card payment service class, let's go ahead and copy that. One for the PayPal payment service class, and finally one for our Google Pay payment service class. Right, so you might ask, what is scoped, singleton, or transient? Because those are the three different options that we have when we add services to our iService collection. Now, if you add a service as a singleton, you'll always only have a single instance for the lifetime of the application. If you add them as scoped, you'll get a new instance for each unique HTTP request in a web application such as a RESTful API. If you add it as transient, you will get a new instance every single time that you want to use that dependency. That brings us to injecting our entire factory method itself. So we are going to register our factory method as a transient service. So we can say services.addTransient, and then we'll add it as a function delegate. Now, the first thing that we need to pass there is our key, and our key will be the payment method enum. Then the type that we want to return with this delegate, and that will be the iPaymentService. We'll use lambda here, so let's say service provider key, and then let's use our curly brackets there. Let's cut the switch statement here and paste it into the lambda here. All right, then we can go ahead and change payment method to key, because that is in fact our payment method. And then we'll say if the value of key is credit card, we'll no longer instantiate the credit card payment service, but instead we'll say service provider. There we get that. Dot get service. And then we'll say we want the credit card payment service specifically. Okay, so now regardless of how many constructor parameters or dependencies the credit card payment service class depends on, dependency injection will make sure that those dependencies get injected into the constructor of the credit card payment service class. Now if the value of the enum is PayPal, we'll get the PayPal payment service from the iService collection and return that. Now, the only way that this is possible is because we are in fact adding each of those services to our service collection up there. And then the final case that we are going to handle is Google Pay, and we'll get the Google Pay payment service in this instance. And then we'll say the key, which would be the value of payment method. If it's not supported here, we'll throw a new not supported exception and say key, which could be something like Apple Pay, is not currently supported as a payment method. Okay, now it will say that we are not returning all code paths. So let's just say here return null. And that's just to let it compile, because we'll always return something or throw an exception in this instance. Okay, so that's all we have to do. Our factory method now supports dependency injection. So the next thing we need to do is to go and add this to our service collection in our program.cs class, which is called when our application starts up. We can do so by saying iPaymentService, call it payment service, equals payment factory dot create. Then we'll pass in the builder.services, and the builder.services is in fact our iService collection that contains all of our registered services. And then we need to say builder.services dot add transient, and then we'll say iPayment service, and we'll pass in the payment service. Okay, so we are adding our iPayment service interface as a transient, but we are getting it from our payment factory, and we are not specifically specifying which instance we want to add to our service collection, because we are deferring that responsibility to the factory method. So let's go ahead and add a REST controller to test if this works. So I'm going to create a new folder here and call it controllers. Then I'm going to create a new class and call it payments controller. And the first thing that we need to do is to use the API controller attribute to mark this payments controller as a REST controller. Add the Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.MVC package here. Then we'll use the root attribute to specify our request mapping path. And we can specify that as API / and then we'll use the controller placeholder here. Now the controller placeholder will basically be substituted by the payments name there. So it will be API / payments. Okay, then we want to go and inject our factory method as a dependency into the constructor of the payments controller class. We can do that by first adding a field for it, say private read only func, and then payment method as our factory key, and then our return type as payment service. Let's call our field underscore payment factory resolver. Okay. And then go ahead and add the using statement for our enum, our payment method enum there. And then let's add a constructor for our payments controller. Say public payments controller. And then we'll pass in our function delegate here, our payment resolver. Right. This payment resolver function delegate basically contains our factory method, and you'll see just now what I mean. Underscore payment factory resolver equals payment factory resolver. Okay, and then let's go and add an HTTP post method. Say HTTP post. Then we can say public action result. We'll simply return a string. Let's call our method pay. Then we'll specify a form body, which will be our JSON request body that we'll be sending to this REST controller. And then we need to go ahead and add a DTO. So I'm going to say new folder, DTO. Let's create a new request DTO. We can call it payment request DTO. Okay, and then we are going to add two properties. So we'll say public double, call it amount. Right, and then one more property, public payment method, also call it payment method. Right, let's add the using statement for our enum there. All right, so our payment request DTO will now represent our form body or JSON request body, and the schema would have two fields in it, an amount and a payment method. So let's say form body is payment request DTO. We'll call it request. Okay, let's go ahead and add the using statement there. And then we can say I payment service, call it payment service, equals underscore payment factory resolver, and then we need to pass in the key. So the key will basically be passed to this switch. Okay, and the resolver knows that because we have specified the payment method as our key, right? So here we'll say request dot payment method, and that will actually be passed to the factory method. And then if it's, for example, credit card, it'll get the credit card payment service from the iService collection and return that with all of its dependencies that are already injected in the iService collection interface. Okay, so then we can simply say string result message equals payment service dot pay, and we need to pass in an amount of type double, and we can also get that from our request DTO. Okay, so here we are resolving the specific iPayment service implementation, and then we'll invoke the pay method on that implementation, and then we'll return a message, and then we can return the HTTP status code as well as our result message, because the action result expects an HTTP status code as well as a string return value, which is our result message. But for us to make that possible, we need to extend the controller base to have access to our OK, which is HTTP status code 200, and then we'll pass in result message. Okay, so what we can do now is make sure that we add a ASP.NET Core URL in here. So by default, you should have that in your launch.json file. But also go ahead and add the ASP.NET Core URLs. I've already done that. HTTP localhost port 5000. If you are using Visual Studio, I think you'll have launch settings.json as opposed to launch.json. Or you can go to your project properties, and then under debug, there should be a space where you can go and add environmental variables. Okay, so hit F5 to debug. Let's add a breakpoint in our HTTP post method there. Then go ahead and open up Postman. Let's change it from a get to a post. Then HTTP / localhost port 5000 /API / payments. Now remember, this is where we are getting our path from, /API / payments. Now it doesn't sound right because we are wanting to make a payment here. So let's modify our path specifically and say /make payment. Let's run it again. But if we go back now, we can say /make payment. Then we need to specify a JSON request body. So click on body, raw, and JSON. Then this needs to be the same as our payment request schema. So if you open up that, we need to pass in an amount. We can say $1,000, comma, our payment method. And for that, we need to specify an enum value, and that will be either 0, 1, or 2. 0 for credit card, 1 for PayPal, and 2 for Google Pay. So let's change that to 2 for Google Pay. We can add a breakpoint in each one of our concrete payment service classes: credit card payment service, Google Pay payment service, and PayPal payment service. And this is just to see which concrete payment service class is being resolved by the factory method. And then let's hit send. It doesn't work, and the reason for that is because of the /, because that's already being added by .NET for us. So it will be API / payments and then / make payment. So we have API payments / make payment. Hit send. There you can see that it hits our HTTP post method. Then if we step into the factory, you'll see that the value of key is Google Pay, because we passed the enum with the value 2, which is Google Pay. And then we get the Google Pay payment service from our iService collection interface, or iService provider that has access to the service collection. And then you'll see that it actually resolved Google Pay payment service. And then when we invoke the pay method, you'll see that it hits the pay method in the Google Pay payment service class. And if we continue there, you'll see that we return a result message: successfully paid $1,000 to merchant using Google Pay. I'm just going to let it run with F5. And in here in Postman, you'll see HTTP status code 200, and our message: successfully paid $1,000 to merchant using Google Pay. So now let's change that to 0, hit send. I'm just going to let it run. It hits the credit card payment service, and then you'll see successfully paid $1,000 to merchant using a credit card. Okay, let's change this to 1 just for completeness sake, and then let it run. It hits the PayPal payment service. Let it run again. and there it says successfully paid $1,000 to merchant using Google Pay. Okay, so this is how you convert a classic factory method to an injectable factory method with C# and .NET. If you've liked this video and would like to see more of these types of videos, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button.